What if the story of Egyptology is only half told? In this episode, we uncover the hidden lives of the women who shaped the discipline, from the excavations to tea rooms, from the Nile to the lecture halls. Stay with us. The forgotten voices of Egyptology are about to speak. Hello, everyone. Here we are again in another new episode of Science Factory. Our guest today is Dr. Kate Sheppard. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. It's wonderful to be here.
We are going to talk about your career in general and also about your recent books that I happen to have here with me. But before we start talking about your books, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I have degrees in Egyptian archaeology from University College London, and then also my PhD is in the history of science. So you and I were kind of talking a little bit off camera before we came on here that I usually sort of associate myself with historians of science because Egyptology, Egyptian archaeology is a science, but it's not something that people don't do a whole lot of history of archaeology that are historians. A lot of times people come to the history of archaeology from archaeology. So I kind of cross several disciplinary lines and I kind of find it hard sometimes to sort of fit into a certain group of people. So I take advantage of that and go to all of the groups that I fit in and make lots of wonderful friends and meet lots of great people and hear a lot of different perspectives about the kind of work that archaeologists do and historians do. And I'm really lucky because I then get to take all of those and incorporate them into my work, which is really fun. And then I currently live in Missouri, and I am at the University of Missouri. I'm actually at, it's a big system, but I'm at Missouri S&T, which is in Rolla, Missouri. It's an engineering school, basically, but I am in the history department, and I teach history of science. And I hardly ever get to do a whole lot of Egyptology anything in the classroom. So it's fun when I get to, but I really do love to take the time to talk to people about my passion, right, which is Egyptian archaeology, the history of the discipline.
That sounds very interesting. For me, also the history of Egyptology and the history of archaeology in general, I think it's very exotic and it's very interesting. Unfortunately, I haven't had the chance to get very deep into it, but I think it's really fascinating. What brought you to Egyptology? Why do you love it so much?
I bet, there are a lot of people, this is my story, right? Something sort of struck me around the age of 9 or 10. And I was like, oh man, this looks really cool. I remember my dad, we had all these National Geographic magazines in the garage, like in boxes. And he sort of handed me the one, I think it was from 1979, maybe. So it was old to me because I was born in 1979. So I took a look at this 1990, and I was like, wow, this is old. But it had the mask, Tutankhamun's mask on the front. It just took up the entire front. And I, not to be cliche, but that really drew me in, absolutely fascinated by it. And the story in there, was about the uncovering of the tomb, and then a lot of the artifacts that are now in Cairo. And I was reading through it and I didn't really have the language. I didn't have the full coherent thought of where are the women in this? But I remember sort of reading it and being like, I'm really more interested in what the people were doing in 1922 than I am in King Tutankhamun's life. I wanted to know more about the story of the people who were bringing these artifacts up out of the ground. Who were the Egyptians who were working on it? Were there women working on it? These are questions that I remember sort of rolling around in my mind. And then I decided to do a graduate degree in Egyptian archaeology. And I thought, I love it, but I'm not interested in going into the field. And so I decided I wanted to look at the people who had been doing a lot of the excavating. And my time focuses really on the period that I study really focuses on sort of 1880 to about 1925 or so. which includes, right, that original thing, that original story that brought me into it. But I don't actually I hardly ever talk about the tomb of Tutankhamun, even though it is still, of course, interesting to me and to so many others. But yeah, I wanted to learn about the lives of these people. What brought them to Egypt? What motivated them? What is it that they were doing and why? So it was sort of a strange way to get here, but my history of science PhD was really helpful in understanding how to write biography, how to understand people, how to understand the development of disciplines over time. Yeah, so I take all of that and I study Egyptology.
You already answered a couple of questions I had prepared, so now I have to improvise. Thank you very much. Okay, so now I wanted to start, okay, with this. This is your latest book, right? Because this is older. So, Women in the Valley of the Kings. It's not only a powerful title, it's a bold statement, reclaiming space, visibility, and agency for a group of women whose work shaped Egyptology behind the scenes and often against the odds. Why this book and why now? What made you feel this story needed to be told in this way?
First of all, thank you for saying that about the title, because one, people ask me often, like, were there any women working in the Valley of the Kings? And there absolutely were. But like you said, they don't get the space in a lot of the books that are published about archaeology in Egypt. So I really wanted to make sure to tell their stories as accurately as possible. Why this book and why now? My work in the history of Egyptology started with Flinders Petrie, as a lot of people's do. And I was looking at some of his work. I wasn't sure what I was going to find. I thought, well, I might as well start with him. Seems like a pretty important guy. And I knew him from my time at University College. So I found out that he was actually really central to the eugenics movement and sort of to the to making sure that sort of people were talking about and hopefully practicing judicious mating. He was really racist, and he was a misogynist, even though a lot of people sort of say, oh, but he brought women to the field, et cetera, et cetera. And he did. But I was reading his autobiography, and in it, he has one line. It's sort of a throwaway half sentence. It's not even a full sentence. And he says, my colleague, Miss Murray, came to help us with the Assyrian. And I was like, as I was reading through his autobiography, I thought, I wonder who this is, sort of put a pin in that. Finished my master's thesis, came back, thought about what am I going to do my dissertation on. So I started to look up this Miss Murray, and it turned out it was Margaret Alice Murray. And she worked with him for something like 50 years. She started working with him in 1894, and she worked with him until he died in 1942. So, 48 years. And she was basically his right hand in London at the department at University College. And she did all of this other really wonderful stuff. And she lived for 100 years. But in one sort of throwaway sentence, he kind of dismissed most of the rest of the work that she had done throughout the course of his career and her career. Which also, as a little aside, in her own autobiography, Flinders Petrie gets an entire chapter to himself. So it was a little bit, out of balance in terms of their discussion of each other. So I figured if there's this whole life, and I wrote my entire dissertation about her, but if there's this whole life that can kind of be thrown away in a half a sentence, who else are we missing? Who else is being spoken over? Who's not even in the story? And so I sort of have spent the rest of my career doing this kind of work and finding the women who maybe a throwaway sentence, maybe their names aren't even really in the record that much. What can we find out about them? What can we know about them? And so over the last, 20 or so years, I've just kind of been gathering all of these stories. And it was kind of about time. I was sort of bursting at the seams with all of these wonderful stories to tell about what women were doing in Egyptology. And so it felt like the right time. A lot of people sort of say, and this may be a question, how long did it take you to write this book? And in terms of sort of sitting down at my computer, 18 months, but in terms of how these stories have been sort of running through my brain and kind of, sort of running through my heart, it's been 20 years of sort of knowing about them, but needing other people to know about them as well. And why now? I mean, there's so many women are losing their voices and so many women are losing their agency that I think that in the modern world that I think we need to kind of understand the impacts that women can have on not just the sciences, but society and culture, and how important women's voices and agency are to all of us.
It's very interesting. And how difficult was it to collect information about this unseen women? Because I can imagine that, first of all, identifying their names, because as you said, Petrie didn't mention her complete name, only
Yep.
Miss Mary, which can be like, wow.
Yeah.
How do you find that person? And then how do you find information about that person? What kind of information can you find? Because I imagine it must be really difficult to find information about them. How was that?
So luckily, all the Egyptological archives I have ever had to visit are full of lovely people. So the main archives that I used in Women in the Valley of the Kings were the Griffith Institute, Egypt Exploration Society, the Petrie Museum, and there are other smaller ones, not smaller ones, but archives I didn't depend on as much. Like I found a few things in there. So the British Museum, the Toledo Museum of Art. I mean, I could list a bunch, Lake Erie Seminary in Ohio, but there are all of these archivists they know so much stuff. And they have so many archival documents. They have wonderful finding aids. So I just started reaching out to archivists and sort of saying, hey, I want to come and take a look at this because I know that you have this. Oh, Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York also. But and every single one, no question, they were just like, yeah, here's some stuff. Come and look. Here's, let's set up your appointment. Now I had to get there, right? So I had a lot of funding and things like that, but it was a lot of traveling to these places, reading through lots and lots and lots and lots of pages of documents, and sometimes finding fun surprises in them. It was kind of like a detective story where I sort of said, hey, I want to know more about Caroline Ransom Williams. So I know she was at the University of Chicago. So I went to the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures archive. Fantastic, wonderful people there who sort of guided me through the material. And John Larson, who used to be the archivist there, we sat and talked in the archive for a couple of hours, and he just told me a bunch of stories about things James Breasted had done. And did you know this? And did you know that? I'm like, I had no idea. So it was in talking to a lot of experts in those particular areas. And then the hardest part, though, is taking things like newspaper documents, diaries, and personal letters, along with, a map of a site, and sort of taking those pieces of evidence and trying to build them into a coherent story about what happened, in this particular time and place. So that part was very difficult, but the finding of it, especially in terms of people being open to sharing materials with me, like probably the easiest thing. I'm friends now with a lot of those archivists and librarians because they're so open and they want to share this information. They want to get it out there. So I was really lucky in finding really wonderful people, and then getting funding from my institute, and also just being able. My husband takes care of our son when I'm gone on long trips, so like there's an entire infrastructure around a researcher. Whether it's an archaeologist in the field or a historian in the archive. There's so much support that goes into one person, quote unquote, doing this job. It's so many other people that make it possible.
That's awesome. And you were saying before that you had some surprises. Can you give us an example of something that surprised you?
Yeah. So Emily Patterson, she is part of the book. She has part of a chapter. She's like included in a chapter with Kate Bradbury. She was a surprise find to me. And this happened when I was at the Egypt Exploration Society. Um, I don't remember which year, but the current director is Carl Graves, and he was the archivist at the time. So this was quite a few years ago. And I was reading through some of the letters that were being sent and sent, like they were being sent out, and then letters they were receiving. And everyone was addressing their letters to Emily Patterson. And so I said, "Hey, Carl, like, do you know who this is, who Emily Patterson is?" He's like, "Ooh, I don't." He's like, "I know of her, like I know her name appears all over the archives, but I don't know much about her life." And I was like, "Wow, I would love to find out more about this." And then I went to lunch. Like, it's lunchtime for me. I went and had some really good Indian food for lunch, and I came back. I was gone for like an hour. I came back, and in my spot in the archive was a stack of sources that Carl had taken a much shorter lunch than I did, and went into the archives and found. And he had like put bookmarks in every place that she was mentioned. And we spent the next few years just like exchanging information about Patterson, and just talking about the women of the Egypt Exploration Society. And so it's that, you know, just finding her and seeing all of these people who'd been depending on her for information and for guidance, whether it was guidance about, hey, can you get me some money? Or can you send me the artifacts that you promised that you would send me? All of these things were sort of centered in this one person. And people had, you know, scholars had used these archives for years, but no one had mentioned that Patterson was the center of all of this. And so that was one big surprise, was just finding her, finding that she existed, and finding how important she was to the discipline of, you know, Egyptology in Britain from its start in sort of, you know, the mid 1880s.
It's amazing, and it's so nice to work with this kind of people that help you out and that you
Yes.
can create a friendship with, you can establish
Hmm.
a friendship with after sharing all these moments. It's that is very nice.
Yeah.
And you highlight both the brilliance and the obstacles these women faced. What were some of the most common barriers they encountered in
Mhm.
gaining access to digs, institutions, or recognition?
So some of the main barriers really were barriers of the age, if that makes sense. University College London had been the first university in Britain to allow women to take degrees on equal terms with men. Technically, they did this from their start in 1821, 1822. But really, it kind of depended on whether or not the individual instructor wanted to allow a woman into their classroom because I mean, you know, women can be distracting to men who are trying to focus on science. And the male instructors were like, if they didn't want a woman in their classroom, then they didn't have to accept them. So there were barriers to education. Cambridge and Oxford didn't allow women to equal degrees until Oxford was 21 and Cambridge, I think, was 1948. So women could go and take classes and they would get a special completion certificate, but they wouldn't actually get a degree. So barriers to education were one, barriers to funding. Um, if you were already independently wealthy, that wasn't really a problem, or if your father had money and he was giving that to you. But you know, women couldn't really like access much of the funding from wealthy patrons like men could. Um, and just in general, kind of what were the jobs that women should be doing on excavation was a point of contention, right? Should they be excavating? Are they strong enough? Do they have the will to be in the field? Or should they be, you know, doing the artifact cleaning and the recording and doing the journaling and paying people? going to the, market when it needed to be done and that sort of thing. So there were a lot of gendered expectations of women in this period that kept them from having access to a lot of places. And then you mentioned recognition. It was very common for, men, for example, Flinders Petrie, who published site reports, scientific reports about what they found on their site every year. And he often, would, say, here's who was on site. And he would talk about his wife, Hilda Petrie, and he would mention that she was there. But the parts in the book that were written and actually credited usually went to men. Even though the women were the one doing the recording, they were doing the journaling, they provided all of the details for what these men were writing. But citation was different back then, and credit was given differently, and not necessarily, I don't think that any of it was necessarily active or necessarily malicious. They weren't sort of like, yeah, this woman worked on this and we're just not going to put her name on it. That was not normally the case. But just not mentioning somebody was very, very easy to do. And that usually happened to women more than men.
Has that changed?
How has it changed?
When exactly? Or exactly, more or less, do you think?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. So Margaret Murray, she published a few site reports on her own, based on work that she did on site with Flinders Petrie. So he was very open to that, actually. And I mean, I would probably say, and there were people who were very open to that and sort of saying, yeah, you did this work, publish it and put your name on it. I think it probably changed, I want to say, by and large, probably in the 30s and the 40s. There were a few people who did encourage that. James Breasted in the United States was one. He trained Caroline Ransom William as he would have a male student. Her problem, though, like again with a bunch of other women in the field, were their domestic concerns when they got back home, people that they had to care for, jobs that they needed to maintain so that they could survive. And so there were people, Petrie, Breasted, who said, yes, you did this. I encourage this. You're a good Egyptologist, not just good for a girl, but you're a good scientist. But I think in general, it changed as the culture of science changed. So I'm going to say, and I don't know for sure, I'm going to say in the 30s and the 40s.
So it's something you can also keep on studying, who knows?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because I was thinking now in the field currently, I mean, there are a lot of women.
Yes.
So at what point it changed or it started to change? Mm-hmm. Because I can see now that there are a lot of women interested in archaeology and mm-hmm. Egyptology, but in general, archaeology, history, all that. So I don't know exactly when that could have changed. And I'm going to go to the other book. Terrace, Hotels and Egyptologists, Social Networks between 1885 and 1925. Mm-hmm. And the Sheppard's Hotel.
Yep.
Oh, this is very nice. I love the history of Cairo and so on. Oh, I love it. How did this book, Tea of the Terrace, prepare the ground for your new book for women in the Valley of the Kings?
That is a really good question. As I was researching Tea on the Terrace, that took, while that was a lot of archival work. My main question that I started off with when I started thinking about that book was, is there any way to know what these archaeologists were saying to each other in social situations? So I started looking at letters, lots and lots of letters, lots of journals of people who just arrived in Cairo and they're writing from Sheppard's Hotel and they're writing home, hey, mom and dad, I want to, I found out this and I came here for this, but instead I'm doing this. And I found so much of that. I was actually surprised. I was surprised how much of that there actually was going on, of people depending on hotels as social spaces and as scientific spaces where they would share scientific ideas and where their knowledge was sort of taking shape within this social situation. Um, so it actually was looking a lot through women's journals, letters that women were writing back and forth to each other, to family members. So what that book really did was help me figure out what was going on socially at the time among either patrons and their Egyptologists or Egyptologists together in general. And then it also gave me a ton of source material. A ton of the material that I couldn't use in Tea on the Terrace made its way into Women in the Valley of the Kings, because as much as I would love to write a history of Egyptology excluding all men, because they've been doing, men have been writing those kinds of histories of Egyptology for decades. They've been excluding all women. I wanted to sort of see, could you do the same? You can't really, first of all, because it wouldn't be accurate. Men and women have been working together in the discipline this entire time. So it's not accurate when histories fully leave out women. But I needed to, in Tea on the Terrace, include women in the places that they really were. Because if we pull them out because maybe they don't fit, or somebody thinks, oh, let's not make this about gender, they absolutely do fit every single place that they actually were. If we're looking for them as the director of the Department of Antiquities in 1920, we're simply not going to find them. But if we are looking for them as, people sitting on a hotel terrace having drinks and offering money for an excavation, we're going to find a lot of women there. So it was a lot of making sure the materials as they were, like as the stories that they told, basically. And for Women in the Valley of the Kings, none of those stories are made up. I just told the story that was in the documents, and it turns out that, it's all very exciting stuff.
What do we learn about Egyptology by shifting our attention to these social spaces, to things like where people stayed, whom they dined with, or what was said over tea?
I think we learn a lot about the personalities of Egyptologists, because you and I, we go to these congresses, people who are listening, they're going to they're going to conferences, they're going to meetings. We all know that we as humans, we all have individual personalities. There are some people we get along with at these meetings. Others we say hi to in the hallway and hardly interact with them otherwise for whatever reason. So I wanted to know, I think it's important to know about the personalities of some of these characters, because they are characters, but also how much of the discipline of Egyptology is built on the colonial mindset that was extremely prevalent from 1885 to 1925, but also how much of it is built on personality. If Flinders Petrie wanted to train you, if he saw that you were someone who could do well in the field, he would spend his time to make sure that you succeeded. If there was something about you he didn't like, he would also spend his time to make sure that you didn't succeed. So there's a lot of interpersonal issues and communication that shaped the discipline of Egyptology, that I think if we're only looking at the ideas that are published, we're missing out on the reality, right, of the situation, because these are things that we do on a daily basis that shape how we write, and that shape the ideas that come out in our publications. And I wanted to look into that and show these people as real people.
And now talking about broader reflections on public history,
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any progress in the discipline when it comes to representation, equity, or inclusion?
Yes, in some ways. I think that kind of like how you were talking about, there are a lot of women in Egyptology currently. I was part of this project called the State of the Field project in American Egyptology, and there are a lot of women in American Egyptology. There are also a lot of people in the LGBTQ community who are in Egyptology, who sometimes don't feel comfortable saying that that's the community that they identify with. So there are still a lot of undertones and overtones, right? That maybe some people don't feel welcome. There's a lot more inclusion of Egyptian Egyptologists, because if we're going to learn about the history of a civilization, maybe we should learn about it from the people who are who are Egyptian, which is a relatively new idea since, say, the 30s or the 40s. So I think there has been a shift. There's still a lot more that needs to be done. There are a lot, if you no one has done this study, so I'm not trying to say like there is data on this, but if you watch a documentary, say from 20 years ago, it's going to be a lot of white men talking about ancient Egypt. Maybe there's a woman in there, maybe there's an Egyptian in there, Egyptologist, someone who's actually on screen talking about their expertise. But now, in 2025, there's much more representation of new and different populations in that public facing kind of science and history, which is so important when you're talking about perspectives on ancient history or perspectives on the discipline itself.
Egyptology is also moving with the times, with the current times, and all the different social phenomena that are taking place. What would you like the next generation of Egyptologists, especially women, to take away from this history?
Oh, that's a good question. I would love for the next generation of Egyptologists to take away from this that the road to where we are now and the road to maybe where we'll be in 25 years is paved with the blood, sweat, and tears of people who look like them. That there have always been Egyptians in Egyptology. There have always been women doing Egyptology. But it hasn't always been easy for those groups of people. And we sort of, here in the United States, I walk in with my privilege of having an education, of being white, of, speaking English fluently, of being able to write in English fluently, that a lot of times people don't understand how much of a privilege that is, especially in Egyptology, when so much of the work is printed in English instead of in Arabic. Or I know there's a lot printed in French, but so much of that is then translated into English. So there's a lot that has already been fought. And I just want to make sure that we continue to understand that we didn't get here because it was easy for everybody in this spot. Because I think a lot of times we sort of get to a place and we get complacent and we go, yeah, we've always had this right, or we've always had this position. And that's absolutely not true.
Absolutely. And as final thoughts, what are you working on next?
I am working on a couple of things, some primary sources in Egypt, in 19th century Egyptology, that are sort of kind of a primary source, history of the discipline, which is absolutely fascinating. Ideas about sort of what the pyramids were, or who is this particular pharaoh, and before we could read the script versus after we could read the script, what our ideas are and how those shift. But I'm also looking a little bit at suffrage and suffragists and Egyptology, because there were so many women who were suffragists, who fought for the right for women to vote, who were also Egyptologists. And I don't know, this is the beginning of that project. So I don't know if there's anything there. Do you know what I mean? Is this just a cool connection I've seen among, say, 15 women? Or is there something deeper there that we can talk about in terms of scientists and suffrage? I don't know yet, but it's pretty cool and exciting for me, which means I get to go look at more archives and read more letters.
Sounds fun. I was going to ask you the same because I had it once that I thought I was choosing like a super interesting topic and it was going to be, yeah, very interesting and very big and all that. And when I started looking into it, it was finished in like 2 pages. And it was like, okay.
No, that's how I was with Tea on the Terrace. I was like, is this even long enough for a journal article? And then I started getting more into it and I was like, oh yeah, it is. That's good. But that happens all the time with me too, where I'm like, yes, this is going to be it. This is the next thing.
Do you
It's going to
imagine
be
it
awesome.
in your head and it's like, wow, this is so nice, so interesting, and this is
Yep.
awesome. And then you start digging and there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Okay,
But it's fun, right? I mean, it's
yeah.
yeah.
But it's a bit sad also. At least when it happened to me, it was like, oh my God, I thought this was a really huge thing.
Yeah.
And no, it wasn't. So it was
Well,
a bit disappointing and sad. And
yeah. And I think that's what is important about conferences and conference papers is you can kind of go, I found this thing. It's not going to stretch into a journal article, but I could talk about it for 15 minutes and let everybody know there's this thing, and get some feedback. And maybe it turns into something and maybe everybody kind of goes, we agree, that's cool. The end. You know, that's what I do. That's what I love about conferences and congresses and this just interpersonal interaction over a cup of tea on a hotel terrace. Is this idea anything? No, I really don't think it is. And it kind of appears in the letter and then you're like, why didn't they run down that avenue? So yeah, those are fantastic and awesome. And I hope that, you know, you can include some of those in another piece of work.
I wish you very good luck with that. And just for fun, if you could spend an afternoon with one of the women from Women in the Valley of the Kings, who would it be and what would you ask her?
I think I would want to talk to Mary Jonas. She is on the cover. She is the one on the far left, the only one without her hand up like this. That's Mary Jonas. I don't know that much about her. She gets a couple of mentions in the book, but she took over for Emily Patterson after Emily Patterson retired. And Jonas was at the Egypt Exploration Society for 20 years herself. But we just don't know that much about her life in general. We do know, I know some because I actually was able to get a hold of her family, her great nephew and niece, and they had some pictures of her, but they didn't know that much about her either. So I would love to hang out with her and talk to her about all of the things that she did and what did she think of some of these people and who was the person who caused her the most trouble. But if her and Emily Patterson, I feel like, you know, when Patterson was training Jonas, like maybe I could show up there for an afternoon and just like sit down with them and offer them lots of tea and cakes and see what they could tell me.
Well, thank you very much, Kate, for being here with us.
Thank you.
I hope to have you here again, maybe with your next book or your next project. If there's anything you want to share with us, it would be a great pleasure to have you back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon, or no, what time is there? What time is it there?
It's about to be afternoon.
Okay, well, so have a nice day.
Likewise.
And see you very soon.
Yes, for sure.
If you enjoyed this interview, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. We've talked about the history of Egyptology in other interviews as those with Cara Cooney and Aidan Dodson, so be sure to check them out on the channel. And if you're curious about what I was up to last week in London, keep an eye out. I'll be posting some great videos in the next few weeks. Thank you.